Hello out there! Welcome to another edition of What's the Score? And yes, you can see here we have revealed we have a different sort of book today. We have a romance to unpack, which I don't know about you, but I'm very excited to hear Gareth talk about romance since he's our resident horror expert. So this could be quite interesting. But yes, we have Gareth here, and he'll be running those numbers through our AutoCrit software, and we're going to see how AutoCrit tackles a romance novel. Fascinating.
Yes, hello everybody. Unwrapping very quickly, as you can probably see on Daniel's portion of the screen, we are doing a reveal on what the book is for today's What's the Score. Of course, it's a special Christmas edition because we're just entering into the holidays. So happy holidays, everybody. I can see that in the comments already. And the book that we picked, personally, I found this one just looking around for what is actually popular right now. Again, something seasonal for the holidays, and it's A Special Cornish Christmas by Philippa Ashley, the apparently the queen of Cornish romance, which seems to be a little kind of niche all in itself, subgenre more or less, set in no doubt Cornwall, around Cornwall in the UK. Now, Philippa is, if you're not familiar with her work, Philippa is a award-winning best-selling author. This particular book is published through the HarperCollins Avon imprint, so one of the big five, and apparently very, very popular. The book itself, going by the UK charts on Amazon, obviously, is currently within the top 10 in multiple categories, including Kindle overall. So, people kind of go mad for this stuff around Christmas. They want their Christmas romances. We have currently number 2 in women's humorous fiction, number 2 in romantic comedy, number 2 in women's contemporary fiction, and I think around 7 overall in the Kindle Top 100. So it's a very, very popular piece. You can tell
Wow.
it's rather timely, being a seasonal thing.
Makes sense. Yeah, it is popular. You'll notice that there's other people that will do this, like Christmas mysteries have become a big thing and stuff. It's become very popular to do that sort of seasonality, I think, because of partly the way that commerce has changed, right? I mean, it's always been a thing, but I think this seasonality thing really is a product of the new world in terms of uh, going on Amazon and looking for something. I think it's a little bit different than a bookstore, but
Yeah,
I could.
it certainly fits. And looking at what's kind of popular now as well, I was seeing a number, and this is, well, especially on the UK side, of things being set in Cornwall. Cornish things seem to be very popular at Christmas. There were a
Interesting.
few in the running to look at today, just having made that decision, which included things like, you mentioned there cozy stories. There was a couple of cozy mysteries set at Christmas, and of course, big thrillers set at Christmas, all of which are or towards the new year. So certainly winter set, that all become very popular at this time of year. But I think this will be interesting because looking at something like, Philippa Ashley, she has multiple of these Cornish Christmas titles that seem to come around when we get to the winter season. And
Nice.
I think that kind of, it's interesting to see the availability of a niche like that as well. You know what I mean? As an author, you
Yep.
can certainly find that particular niche audience that you're after and really dominate
Yep.
that space, and
Exactly.
find yourself in a really great position. Of course, Big Five Publishing.
Yep. So you got some time. Make your Arbor Day romance, and who knows, you might be able to rank easier. I'm just kidding.
And Americans, you have Christmas in July as well, don't you? So you can maybe get it in
Right.
twice a year.
Actually, I have heard that because I know people that do that sort of seasonality. Yeah, and I have heard that they actually will market their stuff in July because Christmas in July.
Yeah, well, it only makes sense if the word is trending, if it's buzzy online, then hell,
Exactly.
get on it.
You jump on the bandwagon if you can.
Superb. So that said, shall we jump in and see what we
I am
have?
very excited to unwrap this book and see what's going on inside.
Let's make our way inside AutoCrit. We have a number of reports already run, some interesting things to show everybody as part of this story, and including things that you may not be expecting. Some of these hard and fast rules that aren't so hard and fast about writing, because it's all contextual. Depends on what the audience is after. So I guess we can do our usual kind of scoring. We're looking initially at a summary score here of around, well, for general fiction. We can do our guessing if anybody wants to take a quick shot based on the fingerprint that we have there. If we notice, we have a decent amount of indicators between, mostly word choice, strong writing, repetition seem to be our heaviest areas.
Yeah, not so much pacing. Pacing is. I have a feeling though that one reason why we're seeing a lot of these indicators is because of the conversational style of the prose for the audience. So I have a feeling that is one thing that's going to make this stand out in comparison to some of the other books that we've looked at.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, it's
my
quite interesting
guess.
if I scroll down here as well. The book is around 103,000 words long, so it's a decent length as well.
Yes. All right, so we've got all over the place, 68% up to 83.4%. Thank you, Lori, for that exact exact number.
Nice. Well, make exact guesses. Let's see if some bells ring, but if you get it right, 75.76. So those in the
It was
70s.
right in the
We're
middle
quite
of the
close.
guesses. Ooh, S. though, 74. Congratulations. And then
And we
Irving,
had Irving at 76.
yeah, 76.
Good
And of course,
guesses.
yes, 42 is always the answer. Although it better not be with AutoCrit. If it's 42, you got major problem.
And a brief look through the summary report for this one. If we pop on down, there's a few things interesting about the writing, and we'll see this come back towards the end, the impact of this, in particular one thing, but around 10 average words per sentence in this book. And with over 100k words, you could consider it potentially lengthy in comparison to some other works that you might be writing yourself.
Mhm.
But overall, still 10 average words per sentence, which nowadays is right on. We tend to see somewhere up to about 12, between 10 and 12. So that's a nice little piece of information there.
Oh,
Um,
look at
when we
that
come to
pacing.
pacing, only 3% slow paced paragraphs. Again,
It's like a thriller.
in a long book. Almost, yeah. And that seems, I think, like you mentioned there, Daniel, to speak to something of a conversational tone.
Hmm. Yeah. My guess is one of the reasons why it's as low as a 74. Not that that's a bad score, but it's probably, like I said, it's that conversational style that may make it a little bit harder to read in a sense, a little bit more wordy and a little bit less to the point. And so it's going to pick up on that.
Yeah, spoiler alert. There's some things to that kind of sense coming up, but that's not to say that, of course, the book is bad at all. It's rocking it right now on the charts.
Of
So hey,
course.
And going in here, what we're looking at, we will jump into each of these, but certainly we're in a very good place with adverbs, generic descriptions, falling around just above average, not too bad, but we're really hitting the red line here and showing
Mhm.
versus telling. So it's going to be where a lot of our score is getting pulled down a bit, and filler words, of course, which again, spoiler alert, we'll get to. But I'm going to skip power words for now. Whoop, there's a little bit of magic because we'll do that individually. And let's see what's interesting here as well. Word
Whoa,
frequency.
not a lot of frequency at all, just names.
So the biggest used
Big old
names or biggest used words are going to be angel, bow, and I think we can see Christmas there, just kind of nestled in.
I'm surprised
So
it's not more
yeah,
prominent considering it's a Christmas story.
well,
Interesting.
yeah, and phrase frequency, we can tell with many, many different phrases. Now, of course, they are usually related to names. So we can see Bo said, Angel said, and other character names coming up. But we do have things like here, Briar Rose, the country, the Briar to dance. Uh, Usually, at a glance, this will tell you that things aren't being particularly repetitive when it comes to longer phrases, but also that we're going to have probably a lot of dialogue throughout this, and there's going to be a lot of people speaking.
Yep. What year is this from? It's from this year. Just came out,
This year, it
right?
just came out. Yeah, correct.
All right, let's take a look in detail.
So we'll hit our first report here. As always, I like to begin with dialogue, and we'll see what we're working with in terms of dialogue tags. A huge number of dialogue tags overall,
Yes.
in the book itself, but following along, Philippa likes to follow along with the general advice. We have many, many more said and asked being used versus alternative tags. Now we do have compared to general fiction. I believe it's also the case when compared to romance as a genre. As we currently have it, that even said is overused, and all that's doing is telling us that this has more dialogue than you would find in an average novel. It is quite busy with conversations. Not necessarily a bad thing.
Mhm. It also may have more scenes with multiple characters than some other books might, and so they have to they have to do more dialogue tags just to indicate who's speaking. I'm just guessing.
True.
Romance often does. Romance often has scenes with lots of characters talking at the same time.
And as we're digging in, we look at some of the alternatives that are used here: smiled, murmured, added, replied, declared, muttered, and mouthed. Now, some of these may be potentially false positives, for example, if they're just straight up verbs afterwards. So something like glistened, I doubt is going to be, something
Yeah,
caught by the system because it's used very close to dialogue. So this is something that in kind of general writing anyway that we do recommend that you do. And Philippa, I can confirm after spending some time looking through and tweaking some of the things to, personal words to exclude and everything for this report, that she does a lot of adding action beats in between lines of dialogue or punctuating lines of dialogue with action beats rather than going for crazy amounts of other
yeah.
things. I mean,
Well, like
we
right in that example, you have 2 beats right there.
correct, and we do have here on the sidebar we can see declared used 10 times, recommended removals about 7, but there's certainly murmured 21.
A lot of
Removals
murmuring going
17,
on.
so a lot of murmuring happening. And when we look at this, this is being used as a tag,
Mhm.
comma, she
Interesting.
murmured.
Maybe it's
Um,
an authorial flourish.
and we have a couple, I think it may have been smirked.
Mhm.
So
Which
this,
some people
um,
really dislike, but again, it's an authorial choice.
yeah, I mean, there are, it's the kind of thing that editorially I may recommend not doing, using entirely as a tag. Now, you could have a line of dialogue and then state that somebody smirked, but in the case of this example right here, he's smirking the dialogue. And I generally don't consider smirking to be a way of delivering words of
Yeah,
actually speaking.
if you do take it literally, it's odd because it's like, what are they doing? Talking like this? It's a little weird.
Yes, but to the point there as well. Actually, if we jump to the second one, the use of smirked here, we can see that exact thing happening. So there's a line of dialogue. The line of dialogue is finished. He smirked. So there's the beat in the middle. He
Mhm.
smirks and then speaks the rest, and we know that it's not actually being used as a tag in that instance. It's a character action beat, which is perfect.
Yep.
But overall, yep, it looks pretty good to me. There's, of course, the said too many. This is something that you can. It's just tough to deal with because
Yeah.
you could, if you wanted to follow kind of AutoCrit's recommendations to the letter and remove about 128 of these, but keep the dialogue the same, you run the risk of lengthy back and forths becoming hard to follow.
Yeah.
If you don't
Well, I mean, in
if
this
you don't just
example
use
right
said.
here, you have multiple characters. I'm guessing there's just a lot of scenes with multiple characters, and at that point, you do have to indicate who's talking. There's only so much you could do.
Yeah, that's a good point. This scene that we can actually see here, there's a line of dialogue there, and Philippa is wisely avoiding tags as much as possible when you're following this because it's
Yeah.
bouncing back and
I mean,
forth a
there's
little bit.
beats.
There's
There's just
a
3
tag there,
people. There's only so much you can do.
yeah, and even lengthier part here, and the two longer stretches that are kind of attached to dialogue or having people do things just before they speak, just like here, grinning broadly as if, etc. And then just delivers the dialogue. There's absolutely no need to have at the end of that, he said, or something worse like he concluded. I suppose you could say something like that. Really not necessary, and it looks very tight. I think the main issue here is maybe just some of these little things could go. For example, a groaned or a giggled, something like the smirk that we saw, if that was actually being presented as a dialogue tag. But otherwise, simply the amount of dialogue. It's like the story is what it is, and if that's the way you want to tell the story, well, who's to stop you?
Well, romance does tend to be heavy dialogue, so
And adverbs in dialogue. We like adverbs attached to dialogue tags. Not. We generally do not want to see those. 6% of all dialogue has some kind of adverb
it's not
attached to
too
it here that
bad.
we can see. The most commonly used is gently, which is not overused. So, it's something that authors do use and tends to be accepted. However, we have wryly, hastily, mournfully, gruffly, uh, archly, solemnly, and wistfully that are overused, but they're very, very few. Very, very
Mhm.
few. Riley tends to be used by 5, so we see here it's pretty loud when you're close up. Rand said Riley. okay. It's the kind of thing I may recommend adjusting something like that just to add another beat. But also for variety, maybe that's in there as you're actually reading through these passages. I think it's good to mix it up occasionally. So you're not just having like every time characters are talking, you have the same construction with one line, an action beat, and then the concluding line.
Hmm.
Sometimes to mix it up and give it a bit more life, you might want to throw in something like that.
Yeah.
So again, these kind of rules that we're writing by and things that we're looking for aren't necessarily set in stone.
Yeah. It's only
Uh,
74 in the whole book, so that's not too bad.
yeah, and we have hastily here, so it's only 5 with 3 recommended. Replied
Yeah.
hastily, he added hastily. So I mean, okay, maybe that one, for example, um, removing that hastily probably wouldn't really have much of an effect on the reading experience. I don't want to dictate to the group. Of course, he added. Only I thought it would save time. Really, no need for the hastily there in terms of getting something across in that dialogue. I don't think, but when we get to the point that we're looking at novels here that are obviously straight up Big Five published and successful and everything, everybody loves it. Going by the Amazon reviews, certainly people are enjoying this a lot. So there is an element of nitpicking built into that, which don't think too along the nitpicky lines, but certainly something to think about.
I do appreciate this. I tried swooning once. I didn't care for it. Just like that.
The one that I'm perhaps not so much a fan of is Silkily.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of those
That
words
does
that
that does certainly come across as purple for a lot of genres. Maybe not so much in the romance genre. I read a lot of romance, but yeah, that does come across a little. Hmm.
yeah, it would fall into my little list of personal bugbears. I think things like Silkily, they feel just like a little too much for a reach for me. And certainly Quizzically is classically one of these ones that I don't like for some reason.
Yeah.
Adverbs. Now we saw in our summary report the adverbs were actually up here between good and great, so a really
Oh,
good result. Especially with a book with a lengthy word count, or not necessarily lengthy. I mean, it's not like it's an epic fantasy, but certainly longer than you might say about an 80,000 word or
well,
75,000 word.
also for a dialogue heavy book too.
Yeah, yeah. We have a lot of overuse. What we're seeing in terms of the words that are overused, so really already probably actually anyway exactly, but I would suspect as we dig into this it's going to be the case that the vast majority of these are showing up in dialogue.
I would think so. Certainly the reallys, I would expect. That's how I
And
do.
what are we dealing with in our sidebar? We have already count 81 removed by 41, so it's about half of those to disappear. And if we take a look at a couple of those, so there's one in the narrative prose there. Birds called as dusk fell, lights already twinkled, and that is absolutely fine. You gotta say that it's setting up the, especially the setting and what's going on in terms of Christmas. Lights are already twinkling in the
Mhm.
windows of this village, so that entirely works. We have things already in bloom thanks to the sheltered river valleys. Of course, that's being contextualized. We have another one there. This is built into character thought. Now, there's something more of this that I'll bring up a little shortly when we get to showing versus telling. So there is quite a use of already here. We got our first one in dialogue there. It may be something to look further at in
Mhm.
if it were your own work, just to see whether you're somebody who gets a little too into saying things were already this or that. When you're trying to build a sense of the unexpected, you can overdo it.
Mhm.
Probably, I would assume is going to be, yeah, we've actually probably in the middle of dialogue, probably
Uh,
people are, yeah, probably every single probably we're looking at so
Weasel.
far
It's
is
a
always
weasel
dialogue.
word people use all the time. Yeah, probably I'm gonna do that. It's probably all right. Yeah.
And some of these, what else are we dealing with? We have firmly, properly, nervously, fiddling nervously. I think people would do a lot of things nervously in a romance, of course.
I mean, it's only 6 in the whole book. That's not too bad.
So as we get down the list here, we're getting there's quite a lot, and it seems kind of daunting. I think, especially, but it's weird because it's not so daunting because we're actually in a good position for it. There's not so many of these to really dig into too much. Speaking of really, 98, we have removed about 37, and more or less, I would assume. Now this particular one that we've just brought up here, I was going to say that I would believe that most of these reallys are going to show up in dialogue, just like the probably.
This is
However, we're not really.
not
No.
really, huh?
So we have this little passage here. Suddenly he swept into his arms and kissed her, the soft wool of his scarf tickling her nose and making her laugh so that the kiss ended sooner than she'd really have liked. Then again, it was always too soon to end one of Hamish's kisses. Now, the thing there is
I just like
lending
having you read that, Gareth. Can you do that again for me? No, I'm just kidding.
no, I think it's lending a very colloquial tone to the actual narrative. As Daniel said earlier, you would expect something like this. Again, it's a cozy kind of feel, and that works this way. It's not just through how the characters interact; it's through how the story is told, and that often will come into a more kind of casual narrative voice in the narration. So things like really are going to show up a little bit more than you might expect elsewhere in something that's designed to be more tight. So that said,
You
interesting.
love him. Really?
I always like to have a little look at passivity in general terms, just to see what kind of things are being used here, because this can be one in your own work where you're kind of getting dinged by the passive indicators, but not really figuring out what to do about it. And this
Mhm.
can give our score a bit of more of a pullback than we really want it to, because a lot of the passive indicators that can be difficult to manage are past tense. And if you are writing, spoiler, there's tense consistency coming up. But if you are writing a past tense narrative, well, then you're going to get hit a little harder on this than necessary. So what I like to do is switch the smaller indicators off and dive in with a great overview of the exact passive phrasing, which is our blue option here. I apologize for that.
Hamish was sprawled on the sofa watching Die Hard. Watching Die Hard?
I
Christmas
had to go
classic?
to that. Yeah, sprawled watching Die Hard. So the passive phrasing that we get to is exact passive phrasing. So things was like Hamish was sprawled on the sofa, rather than saying he was active in that action. Hamish sprawled on the sofa. Now, I spent some time just clicking through here, looking, which was stocked. The store was stocked, and it's all a sense of quiet. Just a hands-off kind of feel, which again leads into a more casual feel for things. So
Mhm.
it's nothing terrible jumping out. And I would recommend in your own work when you're running through editing is going for this passive phrasing and look exactly at the points where you're being passive. You don't really want things to feel casual. In those moments, if you want things to be active, you want characters to be doing active things and perhaps under threat, and you don't want to be passive. But take a look through. In this particular case, any passivity, it's few and far between. As much as I can click and it keeps going. Again, this is in the context of a full manuscript, so it would be a while getting through them all. She'd be happy if the festive season was candles for the foreseeable. So take a look. This one is not standing out to me as any particular problem.
Mhm.
And tense consistency, just like I said there before, just wanted to have a quick look at this to see what's going on because at a glance we can tell, yeah, past tense narrative. However, we're
Lots of dialogue.
running a lot, yeah, really close in terms of present tense showing up as well. So when you glance at this, yes, I can tell it's a past tense story. Present tense, lots and lots and lots of dialogue. People speak in present tense. Well, people speak in all kinds of all three tenses, but most of the time it's going to be present tense that conversations are taking place in. So I would be worried if I did not think or did not understand that this book was dialogue heavy. I would look at this and think, what's going on with the tenses? Is something weird here in terms of the
Right. Did I
construction?
forget one chapter and write it the wrong tense or something?
Maybe, yeah. But if you know that you've got a lot of character work and you're really having a lot of spaces or spots of dialogue, in that story, well then, yeah, this is great. And you can check it. I'm sure many watching kind of know this with AutoCrit, but you can check it by going through and checking what's the dominant highlighting color in certain passages, where you can see, so red here would be past tense. We can see some present tense popping up, which is the green, and that's within dialogue. So we're like, okay, that's somebody speaking, that's present tense, but what's dominating the narrative around it is past tense. So you're on point, you're staying in your chosen tense. Unnecessary filler words. Just above average, which is great. It's really, really good to see, especially in something. And honestly, this may be pushed again. I think, like many of the things that are kind of reported in this story, just simply because of the presentation of it and the way the genre works,
Yep.
is maybe pushed to the editorial limit while still managing to keep a casual tone. We have that used a lot, but of course not overused. But we have even that's these just variation of that's. We had thatted. I'd assume a lot of the contractions are going to be again within dialogue. That's very really and seemed. And in terms of numbers, that's 128 remove about 94. So it's like that's not something you tend to see too much showing up, and certainly not as much as this. It was really, really asking to cut that down. However, like I said, if we jump in and start going through,
Probably dialogue.
it's a lot of dialogue. Yeah, that's all the contractions. I think that'll is likely going to do it as well. Yeah, that'll break the ice. That'll be nice. But there's only 3 of that with remove about 2, so not a big thing. And that'll swell the coffers. That'd be something good at Christmas. And in here with filler words, kind of tying back to what we had earlier with things like probably and really, and these words that can be quite unspecific and therefore seem as though they're dragging the writing down and therefore pulling towards something of a lower score as we come in. You always have to think about, is this the way the story is supposed to be presented or should be presented? Because the use of really, again, a lot, we're going to have it showing up in dialogue over and over again as people say things like really and probably. So if that's kind of how it is, the last thing you want to do is to be going through chopping up dialogue right, left, and center and making it sound really stilted and odd, just for the sake of bringing your 75 up to 81 or something like that. Chasing a score is not the best way to do it. It's kind of trust in your work, know the tone that you're going for, and stick with it. Now, attached to that, as a sentiment, when we move here into showing versus telling, this is one of the points where the story got most kind of slapped down in terms of indicators, as we're really pushing up into the excess. Again, versus your kind of standard best-selling novel in terms of word use, huge amounts, 1,305 uses of the word it. It's a weird one to try to tackle in terms of showing versus telling, because it's a very standard word. We use it a lot as we refer to it and refer to that thing and this and that.
Right.
For those who are unaware and kind of wondering about how that works, we do have a blog article on the website, autocrit.com/blog, that explains why it is an indicator of potential showing versus telling. Usually it's just a case of you have straight up said something, it was the fact that, and therefore just told us something that could have been dramatized, that could have been presented
Right.
a different way.
Right.
However, the fact that it's also a common word just kind of puts you at between a rock and a hard place when it comes to the editing. There's no easy answer for that one, so you just have to work through it and look at what you've got. But here we certainly see it leading the way, along with it's, of course, just a variation. But we have no, which is always a good one. Get, felt, which is wonderful. Felt and feel, heard, and feeling. So a lot of words there, felt, feel, feeling, that are to do with emotion and sensation, where those are the really great places to dramatize. When you're trying to get something across in that sense, is to present it as drama. But that's not always 100% what you want to do. And this is one thing that I looked for in this particular manuscript. You'll see here where we have felt. So what can happen with felt is your storytelling can become a little bland or a little too safe or a little uninvolving if what you're saying is right, left, and center. The person felt this, the person felt that. Um, Even physically, they felt something on their arm, they felt something touch their leg, and never really present that as, have them show how they feel or
Mhm.
have the reaction to the physical, to feeling something physically be the way that that happens. And when that doesn't happen, it can be rather uninvolving. However,
Mm. Or even just, I feel happy, I feel sad. That doesn't necessarily tell you much either.
yeah, yeah. Unless you're, I mean, you can use that, but in the sense of using something like that, you want to play with it, and that's usually somebody being disingenuous when they say, somebody says, "How do you feel?" and they're like, "Well, I feel okay." But you can tell. We also have context built around that that tells us that they're not particularly feeling okay. But looking at the word felt, because yeah, that's a good one to go with because of both the physical and the emotional side of things that can go into that. Bo wondered if Hamish felt left out because they were all talking shop. So we're inside this customer's head. We're in Bo's head, wondering
Mm.
if Hamish felt left out. So that's fine. So little things like what's this character feeling, or sorry, what's this character wondering? However, as we go through, there's a few other parts that come out there. Angel remembered something Bo couldn't catch because ran to laugh out loud. This evening, she felt she'd learned more about him than she had in the past few weeks, although he was still largely a mystery. So something
Uh,
like that again is simple. And here's a really quick one here. So she does say this is dramatized in the middle of the dialogue, so not to give away the whole scene or anything. But this part here, a heartbeat ago, she'd felt her world had sparkled brighter than the Christmas tree, but now felt tawdry and fake. So we're getting a direct line to her emotions in that moment. Something
mhm.
like that, again, is the kind of thing that maybe you want to dramatize and show later on and unpack a little more slowly. But oftentimes, as well, especially in a story like this, which we can tell is packed full of interactions, is really packed full of characters doing this and that, and while at the same time there's a plot to unfold, we can't take forever to get through these things. So sometimes you just want to, take that direct line and be very clear about it, which is by necessity a little more summarizing than you might expect or you might think works. But again, if it works for the writing, if it works for the tone, if people still feel involved enough going through and you're still using this kind of direct line thing occasionally, that's not a problem. You don't have to be doing, this whole telling or sorry, showing 100% of the time, all the time.
Right. Yep. Understandable.
Here's another good one there. Bo's disappointment mutated into anger. She felt used and discarded. Should be a means for him to realize how little he felt for her and how much for his ex. So you kind of, again, just putting these things together very quickly, and we don't really need to dig into all that in a fully externally dramatized sense. But by necessity, we get a little told off for it by the system because, of course, AI can't work like a fully human brain and make 100% decision, great decisions with all sorts of different contexts wrapped around
Yeah.
them. So check it out. Don't be too scared because in many things as you're editing your own work, you might come across this a lot and think, oh, showing versus telling is a particular problem of mine. Really, just take the time to pick through because sometimes and often I reckon you're not really going to be able to dial it back all that much. Um,
Sometimes telling is a good way to just get on
yeah,
with the story. Good points. Well, also to what you were talking about with romance, right? A lot of romance is getting in the head of a character and it's them kind of summarizing their thoughts because it's their emotional state that's constantly that little graph we're watching the whole time, right? So they have to kind of can give you those little updates throughout, and to some degree, they need to summarize it for you. Because even though you can show somebody falling more in love and less in love, it starts to get a little vague, and so sometimes you just got to get out with it. And I think that's one reason why I wouldn't be surprised in romance you see more of that than in some other genres, just because of the nature of what it's about.
yeah, yeah. Good point. And there's Moving on here, we have initial pronouns and names. We always just like a quick look at this one to see what authors are up to in terms of that. And this is starting sentences with a personal pronoun or a character name, and kind of as we expect to see, 49.68%. We're almost
Yeah,
bang on 50%.
yeah,
We don't
pretty solid.
tend to see it going too far above 50. 50 feels like the upper limit, and somewhere between 35 to 50 ish is like the window that we do tend to see. Some will go higher, but
Yeah,
certainly I'm not sure I've ever seen something breaking 60. It
yeah.
started to get very repetitive, I think, if we started to get above 60.
And with something with so many characters, you just wouldn't expect it to be as low as like 35. That would be more like an action story, maybe with less characters and things like that. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Something more snappy with like one lead character.
Mhm.
Similar note is sentence starters, because these can be a pitfall. Only 5.54% of every of sentences across the entire novel that are starting with a sentence starter, and that's either going to be a conjunction or continuous verb. So, turning
Yeah.
her back on Phaedra and Rand's shocked face. Bo walked out of the ballroom. Now, the thing with these, as we do like to say, there's two real reasons that you want to avoid them as much as possible. One is it becomes very repetitive when you get stuck using it over and over again, having characters mid action do different things. Um, to get around that and mix it up and add a bit of variety is, instead of having the character take an action, is point out a detail somewhere
Mhm.
around them. And this is a really good example, actually. You could have turning her back and Phaedra around shock face. Bo walked out of the ballroom. Then you could be tempted to go with another continuous verb and have Bo do something more, as she goes, but instead, no, that magnificent dance
Walking,
floor.
yeah, walking further. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And thinking to herself, we're always
Yeah.
doing ing to try to keep them active and keep them doing something. But no,
Mhm.
here instead we kind of divert focus and look at an object, or look at a piece of the surrounding, or point out a
Mhm.
detail that's in that space, because not only do you avoid this problem of repetition, but you also build a setting, build a sense of place, build a
Yep.
three-dimensional surrounding for what's actually going on. So keep that variety going. You can see Philippa does that very well, certainly throughout the book. And the other thing that you can sometimes get wrong here is having characters perform two actions at the same time that wouldn't be possible. You know,
Yes.
turning her back. Perhaps she does something else. I'm trying to think something that you couldn't do while you're turning. Any ideas?
Like turning her, yeah, turning her. I don't know because you can do a lot while you're turning your back. That was not a good starting point.
I was thinking sort of Iran, maybe.
Turning your back and
Um,
leaning over. It's like we don't really do that. You're either turning or you're leaning over. Like you can do it all at once, but it's weird.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking of the running there as well. If ran, I wouldn't want to try to
Yeah, turning
run
your
while
back
turning,
running.
because
You don't really turn while you're running either. That's not very smart.
it's an easy way to
Yeah.
trip over your own feet. Just to avoid things like that, so readers aren't thinking like, "Oh, that couldn't happen," or they're trying to picture it unfolding in their mind, and the first thing that comes to their mind thinking about that is the character tripping over their own feet,
Right.
and
Or
then it's
chaos.
weird because they're like, "Oh, they didn't trip over their own feet. That's not natural."
Yeah.
Um, so you just get to avoid little pitfalls like that.
Yeah. Ooh.
Power words.
Yes.
Hopefully, my ninja move in the
I did
summary
not
score when we
see.
were looking through that didn't reveal much. But of course, from our selection, let's keep in mind, everybody, that this is a Christmas Cornish romance, and with our main category, we tend to have about two or three, main emotional categories that dominate any story and help point towards the genre. Um, we can take some guesses if anybody wants to guess what the top two or three might be between. Let's leave general to the side for now, because it's a very, very small category. Fear, encouragement, lust, anger, greed, safety, the forbidden, and energy or energetic.
I have
You feel pumped up.
ideas. I'm going to say I suspect it'll be encouragement, fear, and uh, I don't know the last one. I mean, you would think maybe lust, but I don't know because it could be forbidden. It depends on the kind of nature, but I don't think it's really a forbidden. I'm gonna say fear, encouragement, and I'm gonna say safety because I'm thinking the author wants you to feel relaxed. I don't know.
You may be close. Let's have a look.
Oh
I may
no,
be
love high.
surprised.
Okay, okay. I should have with a romance. I just,
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from with that element of safety is making it feel if it were a 100% cozy Christmas thing, that yeah, you might expect safety to be to be higher. So I think
read
it's a
really high.
more
Interesting.
I think it's likely um a more involved or serious. I hope I'm using the right words. Just based on the presentation, you think you look at the cover and everything, and it's of course a Cornish Christmas, and you think cozy.
Yeah.
But perhaps it's more involved than that, and it's kind of bearing through in the language that's used throughout it. Certainly, I thought that in terms of the length as well, with being a good sized book. But we have a combination of fear, encouragement, very much ruling the roost, um, balanced out with lust, because of course people are looking to get together. That's the point of the whole story. But certainly speaks to romance. We have here greed kind of balancing in, which is oftentimes quite closely tied to lust. You know,
Mhm.
it's kind of wanting things and wanting more. And I think there's some work issues, jobs, and things that are wrapped up in this story. As they're working in different places, so some of that will feed into it. But of course, it speaks here in the big three to a romance where obviously huge swathes of encouragement. It's an upbeat story. It's supposed to be feel good. Lust with the desire and fear of the loss. Will they, won't they, is always the kind of core function of romance.
Yep.
And we're scared that they won't. They gotta.
Mhm. And there is a fair amount of forbidden. I was wondering.
And
Before.
I thought I would take a quick look here at the repetition, because we did
Sure.
have some repetition points. Now, I didn't want to do repeated words and everything and spend the whole time editing, like literally editing the book for any elements of repetition. But I thought it would be interesting to look at the phrase frequency, and see whether there are any particularly long phrases that might stand out in the novel
Yeah.
and drag us
Let's take
down.
a look.
Now, I believe we can go up to 5 word phrases here, but we don't have any of those. The longest, and I like to look at the very long ones, the longest ones first, because
Country
the
store.
longest phrases stand out the most when you're using them over and over again. So when we're at 4 word phrases, we have really kind of ruling the top level here at the country stores.
Mm.
Angel let out a, and rest of the flingers. I'm not sure what exactly flinger maybe
I
is
think the
a
Flingers is a family name, maybe.
perhaps, and the Lizard Craft Center. So I think there's some uh,
That's
pet shop
very
stuff,
intriguing.
or
That got my attention.
it's going to be it's just going to be a craft store, I reckon. But yeah, at the country stores, this thing at the country stores, and then they've probably been at the country stores again.
Well,
She could be one of the customers at the country stores. So the people are going to mention the country stores a lot, but you just got to keep an eye out for, I guess, these much longer phrases throughout. And I think people are talking a lot here about the country stores, and perhaps the character actually works there as well. It's an interesting thing. So it's going to be mentioned, and if it's a prominent setting, it's going to be mentioned more. But you do just want to keep an eye out for these. So here we have Angel, because Angel let out a is quite a strange one, or not strange, but something you may not want to see over
noticeable.
and over and over again.
Yeah,
Angel let out a squeak, and if we go a little further,
it must be different.
Angel let
Must
out a squeak,
again.
eek, and Angel seems to be a real,
Angel let out a howl.
yeah. Angel let out a howl and tears flowed.
Angel let
Angel
out
let out a wail.
a.
Angel
Angel let
let
out
out
a
a squeak of dismay. So there's elements here of this character that you may look at. Angel let
yeah.
out a huge sigh. Seems to be letting out things quite a lot, which again could be a good thing if you want to repeat that to build a sense of a character who is perhaps a little emotionally unstable. And when it says "lets out a howl" or "lets out a wail," there's a sense of like this has been building inside of them. They can't control it anymore, and all of a sudden explode. But they have a hard time balancing themselves that way. Is something that would make sense. I'm tempted to see what the rest of the flingers is.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a family name.
Yeah, it's a family or a group.
Yeah. I think it's her family. I don't know. Everyone's like, you idiot, but I mean, I haven't read the book, but just facing.
Yeah, it's obviously we have to assume either way at this point, having not read it from start to finish. But of course, yeah, it looks like a family. So the rest of the flingers,
It's a
they're
family.
referring to the group.
Maybe it's the love
So
interest family. I don't know.
something just to look for. It's glad to see that there aren't really any extensive, really long phrases showing up here that are over and repeated over and over and over again over the course of of 100,000 word novel. 3, 4, 5 repetitions is not really going to be much of a problem unless they're really close together, and you're just being overly repetitious with it. But keep an eye out for in your own work these longer phrases, something like you see 11 times. If you had something like that 11 times over the course of a novella, you might be in trouble. But Philip is not in trouble. That's all I'll say. And jumping to readability, so we always like to look at give a little glance to readability. And normally, like to look at the flesh reading ease. And this is where I mentioned in the very beginning may harken back to that 10 words per sentence, keeping things crisp, keeping things easy to understand and easy to follow. We come in here with a flesh reading ease score of 82. The general kind of commercial not upper, but benchmark that we're looking for, the kind of goal that most things are falling into, is around 80. With the
Nice.
flesh reading ease, the higher we go, the more readable it is. And most things we tend to see falling in somewhere in the high 70s and circling around 80. And certainly Philippa kind of busts out the top level of that with 82, getting really, really, really good. Very readable. Means the work is very accessible. Easy to follow, like I said, easy to understand, which means it's using simple language. Kind of overall, that's not to say everything is, as some people might accuse, aiming for some extra readability as dumbing down. That's not to say that the whole thing is dumbed down and reads like a nursery rhyme. Of course not. It's involved language, but it's constructed in such a way that it is easy to follow, easy to understand. Sentences aren't running on forever and leaving people breathless and aren't, impossible to parse what's actually going on. It's all very, very readable. And with that, I believe our next tab, looking through this one, is going to be comparing to the romance genre
Ooh,
overall.
we had a question about that. So Alyssa wanted to know, would we compare it to the romance novel? And yes, we are.
Yes.
Are
Now,
you
this
going to show
one,
the score? Of course we will. And this
I would
is
say
going to
that
be interesting
there's going to be
because
lots of, with this being such a niche thing as well, keep that
Mhm.
in mind when it comes to score comparisons. How might that interact with the general database?
Yeah,
I
I'm
mean, those
interested.
with loads of experience in romance in our audience here might have a closer or stronger idea than I do.
Well, it was 74.7 or something before? Something like that? Let's find out.
Zip. Previously, we were
75.7.
75.76.
All right, so 75.76. What do we think? Is it going to go up? Is this actually not typical romance and it's going to go down? Is it going to go up a lot? Is it going to go down a lot? Put in your predictions right now. I feel like we need like the Jeopardy music. Right down your side. I have a feeling that it will go up, but I don't know if it's going to go up a lot. I'm going to say 77.2. I don't know why, but
Oh, interesting guess.
okay,
No, that's not a spoiler. It's not the Daniel knows.
76.67, 82, 77.7. Yeah.
So we're almost hitting 77.8 or edging our way up to 78 there, and
Okay. Well,
that's a nice jump.
good job. Good job.
It's always good to see it heading in the right direction there when we come
Yeah.
to the comparisons. So of course there are um, kind of intricacies and differences when you get to niche
Oh, Bob,
material.
look at that. 78, almost spot
Oh,
on.
almost had it
Nice job.
entirely. So yeah, it's actually a good result, and I think
Mhm.
part of what we've gone through and seen in this book too, which should be a bit of a Um, I'm lost for words today. They're just like it's escaping
It's
from my
okay.
brain. A bit
Sometimes
of
you just don't
reassurance,
parse.
I think, to some out there when using AutoCrit, especially for editing and what to do with things like the longer the results for showing versus telling, and of course things like generic descriptions and filler. When you've got a book that is full of dialogue, you can't just eliminate all that filler, so your summary score is necessarily hamstrung a little, in that regard, because trying to remove it all is going to wreck the book for you. So always remember that you have the power. You know the story you're telling. Just try to make it as sharp as possible, and certainly in this case, coming out with a 77.79 compared to romance for something that is a top 10 seller right now, and that readability score of 82. It's eminently readable, and obviously a really good piece of work. So that's Philippa Ashley's A Special Cornish Christmas.
Well, that was very interesting, and I did appreciate the different genre because yes, the numbers did come in a little bit different because it processed it differently. But even that being said, you end up with a 77, solid showing. So even with all those some of those indicators that might have looked alarming, we still got to a good number there at the end. And to your point, a lot of those indicators are something that maybe in this specific situation look at it a little bit differently than if you're writing a different genre.
Yeah, there are some things contextually that you just can't get away from. There
Yep.
you're stuck with it.
Nope. Oh, this is a good question. When are we planning part three of After the Draft? Well, it's actually going to be in 2022. We want to hold you in suspense. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to do it next week on Tuesday. We will be doing part three to end the year with a bang, and we're going to finish all that up, and you'll be ready to get started on editing your work and all of that. And that will lead us into 2022, where we'll be talking about uh, writer resolutions, which will be lots of fun. So we're looking forward to putting our lists together, what we're hoping to accomplish. And if you have anything you're going to want to accomplish, maybe you should hop on over to the AutoCrit community, and you can start posting some of your ideas of some of your resolutions. Maybe we could share them. That would be fun.
Yeah, as we step into the new year, we will be sharing including mine. I'll have some personal writing resolutions for 2022, and of course, come along armed with yours. Make the commitment. Speak them out loud. When you voice it in the world,
Yeah.
you become committed. I can see a question there from Jim. What's the reading grade level on that one? I believe an 82 is sixth grade with connected with flesh.
Gotcha. I wonder, can we make resolutions for other people? Because can I resolve that I get to hear an audiobook read of Special Cornish Christmas in total by Gareth? No, I'm just kidding. I just was enjoying listening to you read. I so often get to hear you read these like really tense examples. So for you to have to read this like heartwarming prose was just fascinating to listen to.
Dulcet tones. Dulcet tones.
The dulcet tones of Gareth. How does how does this romance apply towards paranormal romance? Do you mean the romance genre within AutoCrit? Well, that's an interesting thing, right? Because when you have some of the genre choices in AutoCrit, you have a choice. When you have choices, you have choice. I mean, duh. But yeah, you have your options, right? Because if you're doing paranormal romance, well, do you compare to romance or do you compare with fantasy? And these are some of the things that you might want to look at. What we do recommend, though, because you saw those numbers change, right? We showed you right in front of your face. What we do recommend is once you pick a genre, don't keep moving it around because then the numbers will continually change and it'll be like playing whack-a-mole. And you'll drive yourself crazy. So pick something to start out with, and then stick with that until the end is what we usually suggest.
Yeah, there's always the option of an individual author as well. I know we don't have
Oh yes,
paranormal romance in particular broken down as a subgenre or a niche. However, there may be a fitting author in there. If there isn't, you're always free to ask.
that's
Feel free
right.
to contact us if you know of a particular author who's really big in that space, because the more data to build these kind of AI profiles that we have, the better. So if there's somebody who's a
Yes.
real heavy hitter in paranormal romance who has lots of successful books, let us know, because we can actually get all those, build a profile, and actually create that comparison for you.
Yes, always tell this. And yes, and as Gray had a comment earlier, is there a chance that the feature in AutoCrit will exclude dialogue at some point? We're always looking for ideas like that. If you would find that to be helpful, we can certainly talk to our tech crew, see what they can put together, and we always love to hear things like that. So if you have any ideas of how we can make some of the reporting better for you, yes, please share on these live streams, share in the community, because if we can pull it off, we obviously there's limitations to what algorithms can do. But if we can pull it off, of course, we'd love to give you tools to help you out. So yes, please keep sharing those ideas.
Absolutely. Some of these things they can take time to work in and get the tech ready, but any kind of updates and changes, they all come from community feedback. What's
Absolutely.
easier for you, and what would make your life make your life easier while you're editing. So that's what it's all about. So yeah, certainly let us know anything you'd like to see. And while we may not be able to click our fingers and immediately make it appear, we check with the techs and say, can this be implemented, and certainly get it on the roadmap if it can, at least.
Yes. So we will be joining you next week on Tuesday for the After the Draft finale. It's the grand finale, the best after the draft ever. No, but yes, we'll be there. And for those of you in the community, we do have another event before the end of the month, which is going to be our live pitch it session again for AutoCrit members. Check that out in the community RSVP for that, and this also gives you some time to potentially work on a pitch. We will, and you can find some old pitch it episodes on this channel too, if that sounds like a fun thing to watch. It is fun. You get to watch people pitch an idea to me, Gareth, Catherine, Beth. We've had different hosts, and we talk about the pitch in terms of how much of a hook maybe we had into the story or things like that. It's a lot of fun. So anyway, that's coming up for our members as well. Otherwise, we will see you around, right, Gareth?
Indeed. We'll see you next week.
All right. Happy holidays, everybody.
Take care.